Hello, and welcome to the Rad Book Club. I am supremely pleased to introduce you to my partner and editor, Allie, who has agreed to join me despite her nervousness. We're actually going to do a quick and fun video today about the Kama Sutra. We have Valentine's Day coming up, and I got this copy of Kama Sutra, Amorous Man, and Sensuous Woman when I was living in India. It was a gift. And we thought we would just sort of talk a little bit about what's in this book. We're not here to completely pick it apart, but we thought we would just talk about some fun things that are in it. This book is broken down between the amorous man and the amorous woman.
Sensuous woman.
Thank you, sensuous woman. And so we've sort of broken it down, and we're going to be chatting about each. One of the funny things that I found about this book, the Kama Sutra was said to be written over 2,000 years ago by the sage Vatsyayana. But there are some things about it that are sort of somewhat familiar to an audience today. Like, for example, there's this sensibility that a man has to be really successful to find a mate.
Yes.
And this book actually starts out by talking about social life and about how once your education is complete, you should collect all your money. Tell me where that is. Whether gained by gift, war, trade, or as inheritance from your ancestors, to buy a suitable house and live the life of a good citizen. Which sounds pretty easy.
In this economy?
Yeah, well, why not, right? This house should be in a city or a large village or in some place which is visited by decent people. And it talks about building a garden and all the things you need to do to equip your crash pad to be ready for the ladies. Of course, one of the things that goes through both books is about how I made a joke about the man comes first, but actually, there is a somewhat of equal-mindedness about the pleasure of a man and the pleasure of a woman.
Yeah, there's a large focus in the sensuous woman that really highlights the importance of a woman's pleasure that a man can provide her, which is refreshing.
yeah. I mean, that definitely shows up in the amorous man, in terms of. But then there's also kind of strange things too, right? I mean, because we live in a world where infidelity is considered a grave sin, but this book is actually full of advice about how to seek out infidelities, which is kind of an interesting thing. For example, it says that if you want to indulge in peccadillos, you should look for courtesans, widows, and divorcees, or even women of lower castes. However, you may turn to a married woman if you feel that any of the following circumstances still exist. And so they list a whole bunch of criteria in which you can seduce a married woman, which to our modern moral outrage, I think for most people would be outrageous morally. And then finally, I think, this book goes on to detail all sorts of, obviously, more intimate details, although it's not terribly specific on particular positions, as what most people think of as the Kama Sutra. It does cover some interesting points in terms of, nail biting, nail marks and love bites and nail marks, which I thought was
I will briefly interject and say that one thing I found interesting about The Sensuous Woman is that there was actually less of a focus on the intricacies of intimacy as opposed to the amorous man. Having read both of them, there's a very small section in The Sensuous Woman regarding types of positions, and two things that I found kind of hilarious were that towards the end, it really is just a number of maybe 2 pages, if that, in the book that says that role reversal, I guess, where the woman is on top, should not occur when a woman is menstruating or if she is overweight.
Oh. Wow.
So very specific circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also very specific circumstances in here in terms of what would be considered, I think, to modern audiences, almost like BDSM, actually, when it comes to what they call of love blows and love cries, which I think is much more overt and explicit in the amorous man instead of the sensuous woman.
In the sensuous woman, there is very much... So I think because it's really written with a focus on courtesans, it's more about the approach of how to entrap a man or a client, so to speak. And one stark difference, I suppose, is that the introduction of the book itself actually says that women are to learn about sex from a close confidant. And examples of this is the daughter of a nurse brought up with you, already married, another girl who can be trusted with almost anything, an aunt, preferably mother's sister, or an elderly maid, a poor old lady who once lived with your family, or your sister who can be trusted.
So these are the people who can be trusted.
Yes, yeah. These are the people whom you can learn about the birds and the bees from.
One of the things about, like, there's a similar list of those sorts of people who can be trusted to be messengers, because there's a lot of discussion about using messengers to go back and forth between people, which is also something that we don't tend to do these days. Like, what I'm curious.
Well, we have the advent of the iPhone and Android, so
Tinder and all those sorts of stuff, right? But that doesn't. That's clearly not working very well.
Yes.
So maybe we have to go back in time. I mean, maybe
we need to get messengers.
Who can, like, sneak little notes into the gardens of their lovers,
which is pretty good. I mean, in a sense, you're getting someone to vouch for you. So that being said, in a lot of these circumstances, it is like a paid servant. So that's maybe less relatable for the majority of people.
Right. But it is interesting, though. I mean, like, India then and now obviously is a highly structured class society, a caste society. But when you sort of read the texts, it suggests that the dynamic between the castes was a lot closer and more intimate than we might think of these days in terms of, like, class relations.
Yes.
I mean, there were, like, there's some subversive elements. Like, for example, like, I think to me the most subversive element of the amorous man is how royal harems can be infiltrated, which is absolutely incredible to me. Like, because, I mean, you think of the figure of the king, and certainly the king's harem being the most private and protected part of the realm. And in fact, inside the Kama Sutra are notes about the dangers of approaching the harem, but how it might be done, it basically doesn't say you can't do it, which, when you leave the opening, kind of suggests a sort of flexibility in society that we just don't see in our society these days, I think. But it says, like, remember, the women of the royal harem are closely knit by silken threads of their desires, and they will only help each other achieve the object they desperately desire. And in a sense, like, okay, now this may be a bit of a stretch from talking about royal harems and courtesans to the modern era, but, like, we find ourselves so isolated in our worlds and in our lives. Like, we are, we're single people living in single apartments, 1-bedroom apartments. Like, this is the promised land where we're all supposed to be individuals and determine our destiny, And in fact, actually, I think most people are pretty isolated and miserable. So I think this book really reflects a time when people's communities were much more tightly knit and social interactions were more horizontal, if that makes sense.
And I will say that that's having, as I mentioned earlier, having read both The Amorous Man and The Sensuous Woman, I agree with you, and I think that there is sort of an emphasis on community and on socializing with different groups of people. One of the focuses of the sensuous woman is suggesting for courtesans how to, communicate with people in the upper strata. And I think that is maybe, I know that there's content creators who have entire channels devoted to this. That being said, I think that it's probably practically a lot more difficult to do today than it would have been at that time and place.
Yeah. I mean, neoliberalism has ravaged the world, let alone, a settler colonial society like Canada. I mean, obviously, we're dealing with a pre-capitalist society and a time when, the mores and the, people's social relations were not based on capitalist exploitation, but based on sort of caste precepts. And it still seems surprising that in a society like that, there still can be a level of sort of subtle subversion between the castes. And it seems clear to me from the reading and from my own experience. I mean, yes, I lived in India for almost a year. That the communality of a society like that, where you are part of a community, you're not just a part of a family, or you're part of a larger clan, you're part of a larger social community. And I think it's hard for us in our society to kind of wrap our head around that, because we're so itemized and segregated from each other, so alienated from each other because of capitalism. So I mean, one of the things that I really liked about reading these books was that it sort of takes you out of our time and it puts you into a completely different time with different social mores that I think is, whether or not we agree with it, is just fascinating and provocative, I guess.
It offers a different perspective, if nothing else. I appreciate that, and I think that's one of the cool things about literature and about books, is the ability to kind of see other people's perspectives.
Was there anything in particular about the sensuous woman that stuck out to you that you...
Yes. So a few things to note. I think most interesting is the fact, as we both said, that there's an emphasis on the pleasure of a woman, which again is kind of something that, to be quite frank, I think is not focused on, and it seems there seems to be good pieces of advice relating to that. And that's the same with the sensuous woman and the amorous man. And I also liked, towards the end of the sensuous woman, it says that sex is about the enjoyment of all parties involved, individualized to their preferences, and about love, friendship, and respect. So that's kind of nice. Mm-hmm. Contrary to that, as you can see, I've outlined a lot of notes in this book. The red ones are anything that I thought, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. That's kind of controversial.
Let's hear it.
This is from the perspective of a courtesan. So it very much is from the perspective of a courtesan in how to bag a rich man, so to speak. Enticement gets you everywhere, of courtesans and desire. When your lover goes traveling, on living as a wife, how to get money out of your lover, how to get rid of him, and how to get rid of him once more, and then finally, of love positions.
So it's basically like what everyone thinks of the Kama Sutra as the love positions, but in fact, it's actually a whole lot of how to chase someone and how to chase them away.
Correct, yes. And I will say that I guess it's like problematic from the sense of, I guess, it's pro sex work in a sense, which I think is pretty, it's the oldest profession, obviously, today in a world that has had a heavy Abrahamic religious influence that is a lot more controversial, but it is quite progressive in that sense, in that it's acknowledged that that is how some people will get money. It specifies to look for weak men, often who rebel against their parents. And I guess there's ways in which it upholds, or I suppose it's the inverse because this was written 2,000 years ago. There's ways in which it upholds a lot of current notions of like traditional gender roles, I suppose. And there's ways in which it subverts them. So I found that to be very interesting. A lot of it from the perspective, and obviously as a courtesan, you would be essentially trying to just like pacify somebody's needs, but there still seems to be a notion that you also want pleasure from these activities, which is great. It does also say do not give in to him easily, which I found to be interesting, kind of in line with the idea of women wanting to be chaste, and from the perspective of a woman or a femme person not wanting to like give it up, which I think can be interpreted in a lot of concerning ways. And I will say that the amorous man also says, like, don't give up, like, just keep chasing her, which is, like, I think that can be considered harassment.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that, like, there's a, I don't know if it's a Manosphere quote, but it's like, don't chase, replace, which is like, my version of that is don't chase, make space. Because it's sort of like, you will find somebody who fits you, but don't chase after somebody who doesn't, if that makes sense. So I do think that actually, some of that advice is problematic in terms of like...
Yes, yeah.
And bordering on, as you said, harassment. I mean, sending messengers, that kind of stuff, it's like that.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. I also think it's kind of funny that there's advice like, discuss things he likes, and... There's also
like to become an expert on geology and history.
That was
it's incredible.
All
the things that you're supposed to become an expert on.
And then here's the other thing that I found an expert on as a man is, as I said earlier, that there seems to be some values that are like so entrenched in society that are difficult to subvert. So there seems to be a strong emphasis on women focusing on the arts and like make your home nice, like learn how to do good makeup, learn how to dress yourself and adorn yourself beautifully. Men can focus on the sciences. That's not for girls. We have girl math. With all of this being said, I do know that this obviously fits like a very binary view of genders. And from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a notion of like there are third genders that exist there are third genders. Yep. So I found that to be interesting that it has a very like distinct binary, but I also will say, from my understanding, a lot of that is due to colonialism.
Yeah, I mean, there's mention of like eunuchs in these books as well. Like there's a whole like there are different forms of being in society that don't exist in our society. Correct.
Yes. Correct.
Yeah, like the way that Indian society worked at the time this book was, these works were done. And, for generations, for decades and hundreds of years, even though it was super hierarchical, was still less alienating, I think, to the folks who were in that society.
Yes.
Whereas, like, like, you and I take our dogs to the park, and there's a woman named Natalie who lives in the bus shelter. She's like freezing every night. She's being alienated from our society because she's unhoused and doesn't work, and she doesn't fit in our society anymore. So she's being allowed to freeze to death on the streets of Ottawa. Whereas in this, like, what we're reading in the society in these books, and when we look generally at the global south, right? I mean, these are, in many more senses, more communalistic societies than the one that we live in.
I mean, I think that, as you've said, a lot of this comes from like a neoliberal perspective, in that so much of who people are perceived to be comes from their career, for example, and that becomes like a value judgment about who they are as a human being. Mm-hmm. And it also sort of is reinforced and has like a reciprocal relationship with the idea that we live in a meritocracy. So.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of get the sense that these works were not created in the sense of a meritocratous society. This was a structured society that was supposedly inevitable, it was natural, it was created by the gods and the ancients. But there was still... The lower classes still had more autonomy, they had more nutrition, they had more access to services. Like they could go to the temples and receive alms. They can still do that to this day. I mean, I saw horrendous poverty in India. But there's a communal sense of it in a way. Whereas here, like the minute people are on the streets, it's like you're ostracized.
You become a pariah.
Yeah, like it's just like, I mean, they talk in here about stay away from lepers, don't have intercourse with people who are diseased, but like there's not that sense of social ostracization.
In line with what you were saying earlier as well, the book does state that courtesans should not seek out social pariahs. That is someone who should be avoided. It is also best to avoid stupid men. Men who travel or gamble.
Does it say anything about alcohol?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. It's funny, huh? Well, one of the things that I was curious about, because there is that whole part about getting rid of an unwanted level.
Yes.
So maybe we could talk about that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Kind of end on how hilarious it is that there's some actually pretty good advice about that probably people could heed in the here and now about
In
when
short,
to walk away.
It very much hints at a transactional relationship, which is understandable. Okay, first you have to know when it's time to get rid of him. He begins to give you less than you ask for, not a dime more than you do. Promises everything but gives nothing. Says one thing, does exactly the opposite. Refuses things you ask for, breaks promises. His favorite expression becomes, I forgot. He begins to speak in asides with servants, oblivious to you. How to get rid of him? Make it a point to be extra nice to people he dislikes. Think of ways in which you can upset and annoy him. Do things that make him feel ignored. Mix with his superiors to make him feel left out. If in bed, turn your face away so he cannot kiss you. Do not allow him to touch the area between your navel and thighs. Complain of the marks he makes with his nails and teeth. If he's tired, ask him to make love to you. Laugh at him when he reaches orgasm and ask, is that all?
So that's not so much about how to get rid of him as how to...
It's very manipulative. Yeah, I think that the assumption is that he would break up with you because you're too much trouble, which, again, is, quite manipulative.
And there's also no advice in terms of how to deal with a man who is too amorous, I think, as well, right?
There's no advice on that. Yeah. No, unfortunately not. When he's broke, throw him out with no remorse. Any courtesan who follows these rules will always be will always ever be troubled by too many men and will also be able to acquire a lot of wealth. However, if things don't go well and you have to fall back upon an old lover, send one of your trustworthy servants with any of the following tales. He was thrown out by the wiles of your mother. You loved him as much at the time of his expulsion, but keep quiet out of respect for your wicked mother. Your present lover is a nasty person and you hate him.
Now, this is all advice for courtesans.
Correct, yes. Yeah, so it's been an interesting read, if nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that needs to be taken super seriously, and I mean, you can call it critiquing the Kama Sutra, but we can kind of be like, we're more having a giggle.
We're having a giggle.
And that seems about right. The perceptions of the Kama Sutra, I think, for most people would be all purely positional and, eroticism and sort of porn for the,
it's erotica. It's erotica.
Erotica, for lack of a better term. But in fact, in the end, it becomes like a window into a world that is, sort of completely different to the one that we're living in.
Yeah. Give it a go if it feels up your alley.
Check out the Kama Sutra, the Amorous Man, and the Sensuous Woman. We hope you have a lovely Valentine's Day, whether you are celebrating with others or you're celebrating by yourself. I mean, there's good advice in here, but also celebrating with yourself sometimes too, I guess.
Let's close with a quote from the book, which is that it's all about enjoyment for all. We want life to be about enjoyment for all parties. We want things to be about love, friendship, and enjoyment and respect, which I think is a good message.
It doesn't seem like it should be too complicated, but somehow here we are. Thank you for watching this video. Happy Valentine's Day. I am super grateful to my extremely anxious partner, but it wasn't so bad, was it?
It wasn't that bad.
Excellent.
It was fun.
Now, before we go, I just wanted to mention that Ali and I went to go and see Steve-O here in Ottawa last year. We both read his book, and we've been thinking about actually doing a video where we talk about his book and talking about our experience at the Steve-O show. So if you'd like to see our discussion about Steve-O's book, A Hard Kick in the Nuts, let us know in the comments, and we'll make that video. Thanks again.
Ciao for now.